What is going on, IVE Warriors? It's your boy Edward V, and today we're going to talk about intermittent fasting on keto versus intermittent fasting on a high carb diet. Which one should you choose? And is one better than the other? And does one lack some benefits that the other one has? I'm going to go ahead and tackle that question in this video. Stay tuned. So an important factor in the intermittent fasting community, one that I see come up a lot, is how intermittent fasting can interact with the keto diet. And an important factor that I see with the keto diet is how that can interact with intermittent fasting. I always consider intermittent fasting and the keto diet as siblings, as brothers and sisters. And the reason that I consider them brothers and sisters is because they do very similar things. There are very similar hormonal activations that happen when you implement a keto diet, and there's similar activations if you implement an intermittent fasting diet. But one question I've gotten a lot is that with intermittent fasting being the umbrella system, is it better to do it on a keto diet or is it better to do it on a high carb diet? Now, some of you might think there's certain obvious things that would make the keto diet, for example, more beneficial. But I'm going to go ahead and break down what it means to do the keto diet and intermittent fasting, and then what it means to do intermittent fasting on a high carb diet, and put them up against each other. See, one common trait between intermittent fasting and the keto diet is that you reduce your insulin to baseline, or you can reduce your insulin as close to baseline as possible. And the lower your insulin, the more body fat gets tapped into to replace as energy, since your insulin only reduces because the blood glucose levels in your body has depleted. The glucose level that you have in your body is gone, and that was your body's source of energy. Now that that's depleted because of either the keto diet or intermittent fasting, now your body has to tap into the ketones, which is using body fat, oxidating body fat for energy. It's the beta hydroxybutyrate release in the liver that starts this process and provides the alternative energy other than utilizing glucose. This is your body's defensive mechanism and the effective switchover when glucose isn't readily available. What the keto diet does is it suppresses the intake of glucose by suppressing the intake of carbs. And carbs contain the most amount of glucose over all the other macronutrients, over protein and over fats. Fats containing the absolute least amount and protein containing a moderate amount. So what the keto diet does is it uses protein and fats as the primary intake, fats being the most primary intake because of the small amount of glucose intake that would happen when consuming a large amount of fats, a small amount of proteins, and a very small amount of carbs. And because you're doing this process, you are reducing your insulin uptake. You're reducing the insulin release. Now with intermittent fasting, it does the same thing, but it does it because of the absence of food. And because you're not even taking in fats, protein, or carbs, that entire time period where you're not doing any of that, you're also reducing your insulin to baseline because there's nothing for your body to work off. Unlike keto, which is strategically removing as much carbs as possible to get in the least amount of glucose as possible, intermittent fasting is removing everything during that time when you're fasting. So keto can still raise your insulin slightly. Intermittent fasting during that time when you're not eating will not raise your insulin at all. But here's the caveat when it comes to the keto diet and intermittent fasting. Implementing intermittent fasting with the keto diet, connecting the two, kind of does a double whammy of sorts, a tag team effort, because insulin is very sensitive. So in the event that you do eat carbs and a lot of protein, your insulin is going to go up very, very high, and it takes a very long time for your insulin to drop. If you were to look at insulin on a chart, it shoots up almost at a 90-degree angle in terms of how fast it moves to start pulling that glucose, moving it through the bloodstream and putting it into the cells for energy. It moves very, very quickly up, but it takes a very long time to drop. It drops at a very, very, very slow pace. It'll shoot straight up and then drop in this direction, just like this. So think about it. The more glucose you have in your body, the more insulin is needed, the longer it will take your insulin to get to baseline. So if you're doing intermittent fasting and you want to get into that post-absorptive range, remember that post-absorptive range is very important and has been shown to take up to 8 to 12 hours to get there. So if you want to get to that post-absorptive range much faster, you want to reduce the glucose intake as much as you can so that you can be burning body fat. And when you implement the keto diet with intermittent fasting, you are doing just that, because keto is already suppressing the intake of glucose. Then your consistency in keeping your body in a ketogenic state is increased because you are releasing insulin, but not as much because of the amount of glucose. And then although it's taking a while, if your insulin is just going up here and then dropping, it will hit baseline much faster than if your insulin hit up here and then started dropping from up here. I hope that makes sense for you. In terms of fat loss, in terms of burning body fat, the ketogenic diet does complement intermittent fasting. Now, how intermittent fasting can complement the ketogenic diet is that it takes some people a lot of time to get into the ketogenic state. If you're testing your blood levels to see if you're actually in ketosis, sometimes it takes 3, 4, 5 days for someone to get into that ketogenic state. Also, your body gets used to the diet, and then it could even take a little bit longer to get into that ketogenic state. So what intermittent fasting does is that if you implement intermittent fasting protocol with the ketogenic diet, it can get you into that ketosis state much quicker. So it's a smoother transition into the ketosis state because you're utilizing intermittent fasting. Now, what does it mean to do intermittent fasting on a high carb diet? Intermittent fasting on a high carb diet is very doable as well, and you will still be in a fasted state. However, it may take a little bit longer. But the promising thing that comes from doing intermittent fasting on a high carb diet is that there are nutrients that you're not leaving on the table that you would be leaving on the table if you just do the ketogenic diet. Nutrients such as magnesium, calcium, and potassium. Those are nutrients that are predominantly found in carb-related foods. And when doing a ketogenic diet, the most amount of carbs that you can technically get is about 2 apples worth of carbohydrates for the entire day, which is not going to net you enough ability to get things like magnesium. Calcium, you might be able to do it, but potassium is definitely going to be difficult to get if you're doing a ketogenic diet. And there are important elements. Calcium, for example, is related to your bone health, even related to heart health. Magnesium is also related to the health of your muscles. It helps reduce blood pressure. Potassium helps combat the negative effects of salt. When there's too much salt intake, potassium is literally the antithesis of salt. It's excreting salt so that you can improve your blood pressure as well using potassium. So those things are important, and those things usually come from carbohydrate foods. So you do have to pay attention to those elements. The thing with intermittent fasting is that it works as a chameleon of some sorts, that you can do the high carb, although the body fat burning might not be as aggressive as it would be with the keto diet, because the keto diet, it releases insulin at a much lower level and it gets to that post-absorptive range much faster. The keto diet may benefit you more in that switchover, getting to that switchover faster. But a high carb diet, or just carbs being implemented normally into your diet, create the variety of nutrition that you might need from protein, from carbs, and from fats. Those are elements that you have to think about. There's more variety of nutrition involved with implementing a normal carbohydrate intake versus not implementing that normal carbohydrate intake. But there are health factors that come with the ketogenic diet, and definitely fat loss is engaged more when you have that ketogenic diet because of the insulin response, but there will be some things that you'll be leaving on the table. The beauty of intermittent fasting is that whatever diet you want to take up, you can go ahead and take those diets, you can switch. And also, if you want to burn more body fat, you could extend your fasting window. So if you do 16-8 on keto and you've gotten really good results, you can do, for example, a 20-hour fast while having some carbs, and the net body fat burning might be very similar because of the extension of the fast. Because remember, when you fast, you're not taking in anything, so you're not producing any insulin response whatsoever. Not a small one, not a miniature one, not a medium one, nothing at all when you're fasting, because you're not consuming anything at all. So intermittent fasting is kind of that key that allows you to eat the diet that you want, but also have times throughout the day where you're tapping into that body fat, where you've depleted all of the glucose energy source, and now you're using body fat as energy. So both of them have their pros and cons. It depends on what you're focusing on at the time. You can utilize the keto diet and then switch off of it if you want to, if you've reached your goal weight, or if you are trying to lose a lot of weight and it's very difficult for you, Implementing the keto diet with intermittent fasting can be very effective because of how quickly you get into that post-absorptive range, and the longer you're in that post-absorptive range, the longer you're using body fat as fuel to energize your body. But if you want your nutrition to have more variety, implementing a normal carb intake or a high carb intake can definitely facilitate that. And remember, it's not always just about fat loss, it's also about your health. So try different things, see what works for you, and whatever works for you is always going to be the best mechanism to choose. And of course, I want to thank my patrons from my Patreon, and I'm going to go ahead and put their names right up here. And of course, as always, guys, I'll see you on Sunday for another FAQ. Peace!